right, it is 10 o'clock, so we are going to get started, and then I'll continue to admit people as soon as I finish introducing our speaker. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today. So you have had implicit bias training. Now what? Before we begin, I wanted to cover some housekeeping items. Please leave your cameras off and your microphones muted throughout the session. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature. We will get to as many of them as we can at the end of the session. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Dr. Steve Cathcart. Dr. Steve M. Cathcart is currently the Human Resources Director at the Cabarrus Health Alliance. He has facilitated workshops all over the United States as well as internationally. He is an expert in many areas of employee development, including leadership, diversity and inclusion, and performance management. Steve has a unique blend of experience in both the public and private sectors. He has worked and consulted for Fortune 500 companies, government entities, and nonprofit agencies. A lifelong resident of North Carolina, Steve was educated in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Public School System. He has both a Bachelor of Arts in History and a Master of Science attained from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical University, where he's currently an adjunct professor in the Master's of Adult Education program. He earned a Doctorate of Education in Adult and Community College Education from North Carolina State University. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Misty. Well, I already know everybody can hear me. Can everybody see me? Aggie Pride. I'm getting a lot of Aggie Prides. Aggie Pride, Pamela.
You are now the host.
All right. All right. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session. So you've had implicit bias training. Now what? This is about a 40 or so minute session. I want to leave some time for question and answers, about 10 minutes. So many of us have had implicit bias training, and then we go, well, what do we do now? I think it is important for me to spend some time talking about implicit bias and what it is. I can't just assume that everybody knows what it is or that everyone's familiar with the components of it. So I'm just going to jump right in. All right, so what we want to do is understand implicit bias, actively question behaviors that reinforce biases or prejudices, identify our own potential biases, and then finally we're going to discuss ways to debias both individually and organizationally. All right, the first thing, and use your chat feature real quick. Tell me what these animals are thinking. So we have the American bald eagle, and we have some kind of poisonous snake. And what's funny, I laugh every time I see this picture because I am deathly afraid of snakes. I have an irrational fear of snakes. So tell me, what are these animals thinking? And just put it in the chat, and whoever's moderating the chat, just throw out some of the things people are saying, what they're thinking real quick.
Something to eat. I'm going to kill you. About to strike. Scared. They both look hungry. Defense. Lunch. Don't judge me. Don't mess with me. Aggressive. One looks offensive. One on defense. I will eat you alive. Snake is ready to attack. The eagle. I see you.
Okay. Okay. So we've said all the things they look like they're thinking. Well, let me tell you what they're thinking. Absolutely nothing. They're not thinking anything because they don't have the higher level brain functions to think, right? So when you think about implicit bias, think about it like that. So think about it. The two animals that I just showed you are using their lizard brain. They're on autopilot. It's fight or flight. They don't have the mammal brain with the limbic system, the higher functions, emotions, memories, habits, attachments. They don't have the human brain. And when humans, we have all three of these brains, by the way. with a higher level thinking, language, imagination, all of those things. So they're not thinking anything whatsoever. But think about implicit bias like this, and I want you to think about this as we go through this presentation. How often do we see someone and then by the way they look, judge them? Who does that? Does anybody do that? Am I the only one that does that? Judge people by the way they look. And we often put our feelings or our thoughts or what we think about a situation onto other people without even knowing them, right? So it's two things you need to get from this, from these particular slides. One, when we're talking about an implicit bias, we're talking about a subconscious function from our lizard brain. We're on autopilot. We may not even know that it's occurring. All right. That's the purpose of that's what the title means, implicit. And then the next thing is that we all have implicit biases. We all have implicit biases. I have them, you have them, everybody has implicit bias. Every time I do this training, and I just recently did it for the city of all the employees in the city of Concord, in the city council and all, and just you name it. The last session had about 300 people in it. And you'd be surprised at the number of people, whenever I do this training, who say, I don't have any biases. Well, that's impossible. It's impossible that you don't have any biases. Everybody has them. And this is this is a slide I got. If you've been to Racial Equity Institute training, you might have seen this slide. And I'm a trainer by nature. So we always R&D, we rip off and duplicate. And this goes with what I'm saying. If you have a brain, you have bias. If you have a brain, you have bias. So everyone in here has a brain. So everyone in here has some type of bias, right? And implicit biases come from culture. We learn to make associations very quickly by things that we see. When we saw that bald eagle and that snake, we immediately associated hunger. I'm watching you. Somebody said, don't judge me, which is funny to me. Somebody always says, don't judge me when I'm doing this training. We said all kinds of things, aggression. And it may be true that the snake particularly was getting ready to attack, but he's acting off of what? What do we call that? Instinct. He's acting off of instinct. He wasn't thinking about, I'm getting ready. Okay, I'm mad. Now I'm getting ready to attack. I'm going to strike you now. That's not how his mind works. He's acting off pure instinct. So I want you to think about how our brain operates. So you have your system 1 brain and your system 2 brain. So let's think about it. You have your system 1 brain and your system 2 brain, right? Your system 2 brain is effortless. That's where your implicit bias is, right? The system 2 brain takes work. Now to illustrate that, I want you guys, wherever you are right now, just grab a sheet of paper, an envelope if you're at home, whatever it is, and a pen real quick. I don't want to take a lot of time on this, but go ahead and grab something, and I want to do a quick activity. And we're going to do a couple of activities today, hopefully. Is everybody ready? Just give me a thumbs up if you're ready. If you got something and you're ready to write this down real quick. Everybody ready, Danielle?
Looks like they're ready.
Okay, everybody sign your name. Now I'm going to assume everybody signed their name already because it doesn't take that long. Now switch hands and sign your name. Is everybody done, or at least started with the signing their name with their off hand, their non-dominant hand? I'm going to assume yes. So just real quick in the chat, tell me, how did it feel when you signed your name with your right hand, or with your dominant hand? I apologize.
Comfortable, easy, simple, effortless, natural, easy with dominant, second nature, familiar.
How did it feel when you signed your name with your offhand or your non-dominant hand?
Challenging, clumsy, awkward, weird, difficult, crazy and challenging, offhand, childlike, intense effort, hard to concentrate, had to concentrate, uncomfortable, brain explosion.
That's the difference between your system 1 and your system 2 brain. Your dominant hand, you didn't even have to think about it. And think about it like this. And with your non-dominant hand, it was slow. It took some time. It may have given you some anxiety. Why is he asking me to do this? Right? So that's how implicit bias works. A lot of times you're not even thinking about it. And we can get into whether some of that is created by systematic structures, because I believe it is, but not even thinking about it. Right? Your brain takes in so much information so fast throughout the day that if we had to think about everything, we wouldn't be able to live. So think about it like this. Imagine if you had to think about blinking. Imagine if you had to think about your heart beating. You had to make your heart beat. Right? A lot of us would not be able to make it. Most of us would. Right? If you had to think about your heartbeat, okay, I got to make my heart beat. Right? Oh, I got to remember to blink. Right? So our functions, our brain has to control these functions, and they have to be able to process information. And implicit bias is one of the ways our brains process information on a subconscious level. Think about it like this also. I'm going to assume most people in here are old enough to drive. Have you ever gotten off work after a long day, jumped in your car after work, and next thing you know, you're in your driveway? You don't even remember driving home. You're on autopilot, right? You're on autopilot. You didn't even think about it. Now, I don't know where everybody else is, but I'm in the state of North Carolina, and we have thunderstorms every 5 minutes in the summertime anyway, right? What happens when a thunderstorm comes up? Well, I got to slow down. I have to think about what I'm doing. What about when you picked your child up from daycare and now the child's in the back seat hollering, screaming, "Mommy, Daddy, I want something. I need something." Now the thunderstorm's on you, and you're driving, and your child's in the back seat screaming to the top of their lungs. So now you're really thinking, right? That's the difference between your system 1 and your system 2 brain. This is a quote I want everybody to take away from this. I got it from one of my colleagues at Cabarrus Health Alliance. It's from Angela Davis, actually, but I got it from Betty Foe at Cabarrus Health Alliance. I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. And that's what I want you guys to think about. And I heard the keynote speaker say it this morning. You have to be able to identify your own biases. If you can't identify your own biases, how can you alleviate the problem of implicit or even explicit bias? You have to be able to identify these things. If you can't identify your own, and that's step 1. So that's step 1. And so you've had implicit bias training, right? So now what? The first part is you have to identify your own biases. You have to be honest with yourself that you have biases. If we can do that, that will go a long way to helping us alleviate some of these problems that we're facing in education and community services and engagement and all of these things. We have to accept that we have them too. And you've probably seen a similar slide But what we're trying to go from is from equality to equity. We want equity in our schools. We want equity in our community partners. We want equity in policing. We want equity in all of the things we do in our lives. And when I say equity is not fair, fair is where you get cotton candy. Is what I've always been told. Fair is where you get cotton candy. And particularly those of you that are leaders, those of you that have people that report to you, those of you that are in positions of authority. Think about all the times you've heard maybe yourself or maybe your peers say, well, I treat everybody the same. Everybody's equal. Well, look at that top picture. Equal, first of all, cannot mean identical. Equal cannot mean identical. That's the next thing. So you had implicit bias training. Now what? You have to realize equal does not mean identical. What you're trying to do is get from equal to equitable. And you look at the bottom picture, that's equity. The top is equality. And I know people that would say, well, everybody has the same thing. Everybody has the same thing, so it's fair. Right? But it's not fair if I have something, a support that I can't use. It's not fair if I have a policy. So think about it from policies and procedures, because I know many of us work with policies and procedures. You have to look at your policies and procedures not from a point of equality or even fairness, but through the lens of equity. And that's what we do at Cabarrus Health Alliance. We're trying to integrate equity into all of our policies, into all of our procedures, into all of our practices. Because it doesn't do any good to try to do a cookie cutter, one size fits all approach to community services, especially in the healthcare field. You cannot say, I gave everybody the same thing. Why are people complaining? I gave everybody the same thing. Why are people unhappy? They're unhappy because you haven't been equitable in your policies, in your processes, in your decision making. This is just a quick slide I want to show you. And actually, this is out of order, so I do apologize. I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay, so this slide, I'm an HR professional. These are EEOC cases from 1997, and then the other slide to 2019. Look at the top two of the charges: race and sex. That's one of the problems with implicit bias training. People are, it's a soft sell, I think, and it's been a hot ticket for years in all kinds of industries because it's easy for people to say, oh, well, let's talk about disability equity or implicit bias. Oh, let's talk about all these other kinds of implicit biases. But the biggest problems we have in the workplace, well, no matter what your workplace is, are with race and sex. And I go back to this one with race and sex, period. And so I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's uncomfortable to talk about these things. I can talk about disability bias all day. I have two nephews that are autistic. On very different sides of the spectrum. One is highly functioning, and one will have to be taken care of the rest of his life. He will not be able to function on his own ever. And so I am very, very sensitive to disability bias. And truth be told, there is disability bias in the workplace. But guess what? It's not uncomfortable to deal with. It's not uncomfortable because most reasonable people, and that's what we say in HR, with a reasonable person, reasonable people assume that you should help people with disabilities. But where we get hung up is on race and sex. And we have to think about in the workplace, the two things that you're going to have to deal with when it comes to bias, when it comes to inequitable treatment, more often than not, and I'm telling you as a human resources professional that has done this work for years, it's going to be race and sex, the majority of the time. So then why it matters is because most of our brain functions and we do this unconsciously. We do this unconsciously. And so implicit bias matters because it's a better predictor of how we may act and our attitudes than our conscious biases are. Look at this for women. We're in the 21st century. We're in the 21st century. So one side of the side is uncontrolled, one side is controlled for same qualifications or same jobs, rather. Excuse me. Uncontrolled women earn about 81 cents on the dollar by men. Controlled is about 98 cents, but it's still less. Why in the 21st century is this a problem? And what can be done about it? So one of the things I'm doing personally, I just had a project kick off Wednesday for a salary study. One of my main goals is to make sure that we erase this in my organization. If this is the case, first I need to see if it's the case. I'm new to my organization, by the way. I started in August. I worked for Rowan-Cabarrus Community College for about 6 years in human resources. But this is a concrete thing you can do, especially if you're a decision maker in your organization. When was the last time your organization did a salary study? To see if you can erase this type of bias in your organization. And that's just a chart showing over a number of years from 2015 to 2020, how the pay scale has changed. But why is this a difficult problem to address? It shouldn't be. It should be a fairly easy, simple thing to address, but we don't. And that's another thing we need to think about. Have we gotten comfortable with things being wrong? That's what I meant earlier when I said some of these biases, you can say they're implicit or explicit, but some of it is due to systematic things, systems and institutionalized things that we work in and that we've gotten comfortable with. Here's another example of implicit bias. Now, we were just talking about pay earlier. That wasn't uncomfortable. I talked a little bit about disabilities. That's not uncomfortable. This is a little uncomfortable. John Crawford, 22-year-old African-American man. This is 6 years ago, by the way. So this is way before George Floyd and all the other things. I use this slide and I use this example because this really isn't controversial. And people are going to start Googling and seeing all the conspiracy theories and all this other stuff. The fact of the matter is John Crawford was in a Walmart on the phone with his girlfriend, shopping to get s'mores for his kids. S'mores. He picked up a BB gun, a pellet gun off the shelf in Walmart, a pellet gun that Walmart sells. Picked it up, kept shopping, still on the phone. Someone called the police. Within minutes of the police arriving, he was shot dead. Now, people are going to get hung up on the police part. That's not what I'm getting hung up on. It was wrong. Absolutely. But you can stay stuck there if you want to. But here's where I see the problem. Why did the person call the police? He was in the store shopping. He had something in his hand that they sell in the store. The reason I say this is non-controversial because he wasn't doing anything with the pellet gun. He wasn't menacing. He wasn't running from the police. There were none of these things that people say when things like this happen occurred. None of them. He was in the store, minding his business, shopping. And I'm sure you can find something on the internet that says he wasn't, but that's what happened. So from the bias point of view, and you can say it's implicit or explicit, from the bias point of view, why did the person even call the police? They're in Ohio. What's Ohio? An open carry state. So if he had a gun, so what? If he wasn't doing anything with it. All right. We have to start thinking about these things. And I use this because it's uncomfortable, to talk about race. Gender, kind of uncomfortable sometimes, maybe, but not really. Disability, not uncomfortable. Race, the number one thing that gets complaints to the EEOC, that's uncomfortable. And that's why we don't address it. What we're going to have to do is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And you're probably going to hear that a lot today. We are. I'm in the state of North Carolina, open carry state. If I called the police every time I saw somebody with a gun in the store, I would call the police every time I went in the store. Every time. If I called the police every time I saw somebody with a gun in a gas station, in a restaurant, wherever, I would spend a good amount of time calling the police. And if you live in an open carry state, you would too. So we have to start being honest about these conversations. What I want you guys to do now is to think about something. And this is something we often don't think about. Go all the way back to the snake and the eagle picture, right? We can look at them, we can identify them as a snake and an eagle. But they also identify as other things. There's a bird, it's a reptile, it's all kinds of things. I identify as an African-American heterosexual male, right? But I belong to many different groups, as do we all. So I'm an African-American male. I'm Christian. I have children. I'm highly educated. I've worked in my field for a long time. I went to a HBCU. All these things make up who I am. All these things make up who I am. So I want you to, whatever you signed your name on real quick, just write down 3 to 5 things real quick. And let the moderator know when you're completed of ways that you identify, things that you identify with. And then we'll talk about that for a second. And just give Danielle the thumbs up when you're finished. So what do you identify as? You're a male, a female, black, white? Do you identify by language, ethnicity? Do you also identify as a parent? Do you identify with your religion? So on and so forth. Danielle, let me know. Give me a thumbs up when everybody's written down 3 to 5 things.
Will do, Dr. Cathcart.
All right.
All right. I think that a lot of people are done by their responses in the chat.
All right, great. Now look at that list and think about, what do you identify as most? And what I mean by that is, when I do this activity, especially face-to-face, people say, well, I identify as a parent the most. I identify as a Christian the most. I identify as, and some people say I identify as a black man the most. I identify as a female the most, not necessarily with race. Or I identify as a male the most. I identify with my region, where the part of the country I'm from. I identify as a southern male the most. I identify as a northern male the most. The point is that many of us, and most of us, in fact, identify with things you cannot see. We identify with things you cannot see. We identify ourselves, like, for instance, I'm a parent. I could say I identify myself as a parent, you can't look at me and see that I'm a parent. You can't look at me and see that I'm a preacher's son. And I identify as a preacher's son. Preacher's kids, I don't know how many we have in here, but we definitely have our own culture. But you can't look at me and see that. You can't look at me and say that I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina. And that's why implicit bias especially is so insidious, because we're making a subconscious decision, right, based on our associations that we've been taught by culture that may have little to do with how the person even sees themselves or how they identify. So that's another thing you can do specifically. You need to take time to get to know people, especially I want to especially keep this in the workplace. You need to take time to check your assumptions, excuse me, and understand people, get to know people. And I don't know if Ben Brown is in here. Ben Brown is, I worked with him at RCCC, and Stephen Sain is the person running this thing from a technology perspective. And they are two people that I have taken time, and I do this at all my workplaces, but taking time to get to know. Ben is, if you look at him, he's totally opposite of me. He's younger, he's white, and we spend a significant amount of time, me, him and I, talking about politics, talking about race, gender, religion. We talk about a lot of different things. The thing that we have in common is that we both want to learn, is that we both want to understand, and we do not agree. I can tell you for a fact, if Ben is in here, and he can tell we do not agree on most subjects. Political, no, we don't agree most of the time. Stephen Sain can tell you the same thing. We don't agree on a lot of things, or we don't agree on everything. But what we can do is have a conversation, agree to disagree, and walk away not hating each other. We can have a conversation and disagree and have a heated conversation and understand that we are both trying to learn. I often hear people say, well, I don't know how to start the conversation. I'm afraid something will happen. I'm afraid I'll offend somebody. What you have to do is find people that you can speak to. And it may be difficult, but it's not impossible. And you have to come to an agreement and understanding that we are both here to learn. And we're going to speak in a respectful manner, even though we may strenuously disagree with each other. And if one of us slips up and says the wrong thing, or one of us slips up and may even say a word that's not correct, and I don't mean the real bad words, but just something that's not too bad, we're going to try to have an understanding, and we're going to walk away not hating each other. And that's the way we could start at work. That's one of the things we have to do. Ways to debias individually. You have to be mindful. That's what I was just talking about. You have to be mindful. Have you ever heard that a wounded animal runs to familiar ground? Anybody ever heard that saying before? Well, human beings are animals. We're classified as animal in the animal kingdom. And when we're stressed out, and when we're under pressure, and when we're having a bad day, we revert back to our fight or flight. We revert back to whatever our original personality. I do a lot of personality assessments and workshops for that. And I'm telling you, when you're under pressure, you are going to be who you are. So what do I mean by that? You can act any way you want to. Right? You can act any way you want to. That's a matter of discipline and practice. But when you get under pressure, you're going to revert to your natural self more often than not. A wounded animal runs to familiar ground. And what you have to do is be mindful. You have to feel, you have to know when you're going in that fight or flight mode. You have to, first of all, you have to know that you have biases. And then next, you have to know when you're getting ready to go into that fight or flight mode. Perspective taking. Consider the experiences and the point of view of the other person. And that's one thing that we don't do. Look at the political landscape in this country right now. We have to at least consider that the other person may be right. Now, look, as adults, and you heard in the beginning, have a master's and a doctorate in adult education. Adults want to be right. There's not a person in this room that I'm speaking to right now, a person on YouTube, a person on this Zoom call, whatever, that gets up in the morning, getting ready for work and says, oh, I can't wait to be wrong at work all day today. I can't wait to do the wrong thing today at work. Now, somebody does it. I don't know who does, but in general, normal people don't do that. Right? We do what we do because we think it's right. And if someone doesn't do like we do, we think they're wrong. And what we have to do is try to look at the perspective of the other person. Slow down. And these two go together. Slow down and individualize. Stop saying they and them and we and us. Start looking at people that you know and that you've interacted with, or even if you haven't interacted with them, that you've seen from the out group. And I didn't say this in the beginning. The term diversity. I hate the term diversity. Right? And I'm at a diversity conference speaking, but I hate the term diversity. Why? Because diversity means so many different things to so many different people. It makes people feel anxious. It makes people feel like somebody's going to take something away from me. But I love the term inclusion because we all know what it feels like to be included, and we all know what it feels like to be excluded. We have all been in the in group. We've all been in the out group. All of us. Even if it was in the second grade, you didn't get picked for the dodgeball team, whatever it was. You know what it feels like to be excluded. You know what it feels like to be included. That's why I use the term inclusion. Look, diversity is what we are. Diverse is what we are in most places now, especially at work. We have a diverse workplace. We're diverse in race, gender, age, ability, and disability most of the time. I know it's not 100%, but in general, inclusion is what you do. So diverse is what you are. Diverse is what we are. But equity and inclusion is what we do and how we act. And it's all about behaviors. If you don't leave with anything else, I often tell people, and I've just recently had this conversation. It doesn't matter what kind of training you have, what kind of workshops, how many workshops you go to. And leaders, I'm talking to you specifically, people that are in charge of this stuff. You cannot train people how to think, how to feel, or how to believe. But you can train people how to behave, especially at work. Now, you can think and feel however you want to, but here in this organization, we're going to behave in a certain way. That's the goal. That's the ultimate goal of training and going to these workshops. Behavior, not feelings. Check your messaging. Things like we don't see color. Yes, you do. And if you don't, I don't want to deal with you. And why do I say that? I don't know if anybody goes to the restaurant, The Melting Pot. And this is a plug for The Melting Pot because I do love The Melting Pot, especially when they get the fondue and the cheese and you melt everything together and you can't really tell the component parts, right? That's what America is, a melting pot, right? And as much as I love The Melting Pot, as much as I love fondue, I don't want to be sucked in to the sauce, to the fondue. I don't want to be sucked into that. I want to be seen and recognized as for myself as an individual, right? Think about a salad. So everybody that likes salad, you got your lettuce, you got your cheese, your pickles, your whatever you put on your salad, right? If you're getting old like me, you might put some beets on there, right? Put some beets on the salad. What you want to do is enjoy the individual parts. So even when you put the salad dressing on, you can still see and appreciate the individual parts. You appreciate it. You appreciate the lettuce. You appreciate the pickles. You appreciate the cheese or whatever it is, or the black olives, whatever you're putting on there. You don't put it on there and then mix everything up. And even when you mix everything up, right? You mix everything up, but you can still see, taste, and appreciate the components of the salad. Think of it like that. Think of it more like a big salad and not a melting pot. Institutionally, I tell people this all the time. One of the best EEOC workshops I ever went to, the person who worked at the EEOC said, I don't care what you think fit means. When people say right fit, if you can't articulate it in a manner that makes sense, you probably shouldn't use it. Because when we're saying fit, we're often saying like me. Oh, they're not a good fit. We're not a good fit. What you mean is I don't like them because they're not like me a lot of the times. Not all the time. Not all the time, but a lot of times that's what we mean. You need to be intentional about regarding mentoring relationships. And that can be a difficult thing, but all the studies show people need a variety of mentors, and they especially need mentors that have a similar culture, similar background. They need all kinds of mentors, more than just one. You shouldn't just have one mentor, but you should have at least one mentor that you gender-wise, race-wise, culture-wise, you relate to. You should have diversity, equity, and inclusion included in your strategic plan. Every one of us, every organization in here, you have a strategic plan. And things that are important to your organization are in that strategic plan. And if equity and inclusion are not in that strategic plan, then your organization doesn't care about it. Let's start being honest with these conversations. If we don't have a word about inclusion for our employees, we all, and for those, like I told you, I used to work at a community college. So we're always talking about equity and inclusion and all these things for our students. But what about for our employees? And that was my main focus when I was at Rowan-Cabarrus Community College, and there are enough people from there here to tell you my main focus, while I cared about equity for and inclusion for students, I was a club advisor for a couple of minority clubs. I was a safe zone ally for our LGBTQIA student population. But my focus was employees. And that's what we need to think about. Succession planning. I know a lot of us work for state organizations, and succession planning is a dirty word. It's a dirty word. We don't, because I'm going to be at this state job for 25, 30 years, and I don't need a succession plan. Well, I don't know about the rest of y'all, but if Dr. Cathcart hits the lottery, I'm out. I'm not even going back in to turn in my computer. I'm going to mail it in. What do we do when this person has done this thing, whatever it is, for all these years, walks out the door? But we need to be intentional about our succession planning. Do you have a succession plan? And is it intentionally diverse? And finally, my favorite quote, I might have mentioned earlier, I have a degree in history. So I'm going to go back to the founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, one of them. Justice will not be served unto those who are unaffected or as outraged as those who are. So if you're in the in group, go back to inclusion. If you're in the in group and you're not outraged about what's happening to some of these out groups by race, by gender, by sexual orientation, things will never transform in your organization until you are as outraged as those who are affected. Thank you. Questions?
Wonderful. Participants, please post your questions in the chat feature. We'll get to as many of them as we can. And Steve, if you'll make me host at your convenience.
You are now the host. And you can unshare my screen as well. I I made you the host before I unshared my screen. I'm sorry. Let's see if I can do stop share. Okay, there it is. Are there any questions I can answer for anybody?
Dr. Cathcart, Janet from Carleton College said, I look forward to hearing more about how we can see the way needs vary. The bicycle is clear, but how does that map when the difference in needs are less visible?
Well, and thank you. That's very good. And I started to use my other picture, but what you have to do, and think about it in terms of this, supports. When you have to provide supports for employees, what you want to try to do is identify barriers. So what we often do is try to address individual employees instead of addressing the barriers that prevent these employees from being successful. So rather than thinking about it in an individual basis, I know that's what that image showed. Think about it in an overall basis where you're trying to address barriers. So what are some of the barriers in your organization that prevent equity? So some of the barriers that prevent equity is people don't admit there is an equity problem. Some of the barriers that prevent equity and inclusion in your organization could be that people aren't concerned with making things comfortable for, and I don't want to say the word comfortable, but making things equitable for all employees. I hope that answers your question, but if not, I can try to answer it further later. If you want to get in touch with me, we can discuss it. And that goes for anybody. I'll be happy to discuss. I think somebody said, it was Benjamin Franklin. It was Benjamin Franklin. So justice will not be served unto those who are not affected or as outraged as those who are. Questions?
Those were all of the questions that were posted in the chat during your session. So,
okay, great. All right, guys. Well, thank you for attending, and I really appreciate it. And also, I'll be on the afternoon panel this afternoon. Put your power where your privilege is on the afternoon panel. And I thank you and all my friends and class and students that attended. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for attending the So You've Had Implicit Bias Training, Now What session. The next session will begin at 11 a.m.
Hold on, I saw one question. Somebody said, how do you get institutions to look? Can you, whoever said that, can you send them my email and we can have a conversation offline? I know this session is over, so I want to make sure that I get to that question.
That's okay. Danielle, can you grab it?
I'm trying to grab it, but people are saying bye, so it keeps moving. All right.
So the next sessions are, I know it's important, I know things need to change, but where do I start? And facing forward, though looking back while skeptically hopeful for the future, the 360-degree historical relevance of America's racial history, as well as universal design for adult learners, student engagement, and disability inclusion.
Thank you, everybody.
Enjoy the day.
I got that for you, Dr. Cathcart, so I'll send them
Thank you so much. It was so good seeing you and Misty and working with y'all.
So happy to see your face.
Happy to see y'all too. I miss y'all. I really do.
Miss you too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So, Danielle, I guess.
I just posted it one more time.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm gonna get off of here so I can.
I guess because I'm still the host, it's telling me to admit the waiting room people.
Wow.
But this is not the next session's not mine.
Right. Yeah, I would hold off on that.
Okay. I guess I'll just.
Yeah, I'm about to go. Are you in the session that I'm in next, with Michael Hughes?
No, I'm going to attend though. So if you need something,
Okay.
Teams me.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Jennifer Rhodes, what session is this? I need to reassign the host.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to let you all know that this session did end. Does anybody need the links to the next sessions?